As the beautiful bride, Miss Amy Ward, and her dashing groom, Mr. Michael Glynn. Before we begin, I would like to say for the record, on behalf of myself and fellow groomsmen, Tom, Matt, Robbie and Niall, that it would be a great privilege and honour to be here in any capacity to witness the coming together of two great families in the Glynns and the Wards, but even more so as part of the groom's party. You. So concludes the Michael flattery section of the speech. I've had the great fortune of accompanying Mick to Heater on two previous occasions before. Last year, for some much needed R&R on an 8-night knees up as part of Max Lane's extended stag tour. Some of us are still waiting to sign off on that one. I was also here for the first time with Phil, Power and Mick, back in the days when we all lived together, which will be the source of this evening's first dinner. We were younger men in those days. Boys, perhaps. My two travel companions, owing to their lack of a suitable imagination, spent a sizable portion of the trip hazing the third member of the group, a young H. Grunt, disregarding his on-point suggestions and repeatedly not letting him out of the pool or out of the sea when he was in a clear state of distress. Well, I like to think I can take a joke as much as the next man, but I too have my limits. Tensions were running high, and after a night of tomfoolery, they would come to a head. Now, I don't recall exactly what happened, but let's just say the event was triggering. What I do recall is coming to, and my old friend Michael Glynn in front of me saying something to the effect that the friendship is soured. It ends tonight. And here we are. 7 years after the fact, at this very location, and I'm tasked with the great honour of being best man Judy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want you to jump to any conclusions about the credibility of this man's words. But let's just say the evidence speaks for itself. Now, as we shift our focus to the present day, I would like to tell you about the good times and what it is about my old pal Michael Glynn out of bar. It's in here somewhere. A trait in him that may go underappreciated by some, and that is his innate ability to engage anyone and everyone in conversation and find conversationalists at that. This can add considerable journey time if you find yourself walking around Heater with him, but given my own incapabilities in this department, it's never discouraged. It reminds me of a time when we were to find ourselves of an evening in J. O'Connell's, a spot full of rare characters and with a unique charm of itself. As we settled ourselves into a corner table, we noticed a man sitting opposite whose demeanour will forever be etched in my memory. It was one of despair and solitude, and the input of more drink had little improvement in his life. Michael quickly set upon him, trying to open up with a barrage of questions, although his opponent would prove evasive and only offered up the bare minimum reply. But like a primitive Greek dentist looking to extract the last remaining good tooth, Michael went at him again with a volley of follow-up questions, each one more probing and invasive than the last. This game of cat and mouse would continue for some time, until finally our companion gave in. And by gar was he troubled. Now, given that this is a joyous occasion, I will spare you the details of what he let us in on. And while this outpouring of grief and heartache may have ruined my own evening, you can see that it genuinely had a cathartic effect on our new friend. Where before he was laid listless in the corner, he skipped out of there never to darken the doorway of another public place. And this is the impact of what an hour in this man's company can have on people. And I've witnessed it more times than I care to remember. Which brings me on to my next story. The year was 2015, and the prospect of settling down with long-term partners was so remote that we were filled with what we would later come to term as happiness. With an abundance of joy in our hearts, we set forth to see Ireland face the old enemy, Canada, in the opening game of the opening group match of the Rugby World Cup in Paris. Chris Cockman, recently cleared to drive after a spate of DUIs, was tasked with getting us there by RV, which would also serve as our sleeping quarters for the weekend. After a fraught encounter with the Canadians, with some spare time in our hands, we decided to whittle away the hours by taking in some of the many ale houses that Cardiff has to offer. Later on that evening, after much hootering and hollering, we were to find ourselves in the company of a man from the travelling community. And as men often do, after a few drinks, there's a tendency for them to open up to anyone willing to listen. And by gar was he also troubled. And for good reason. He told us of the hardships of the community, the last vestiges of acceptable discrimination in Ireland, across the board the lower life expectancy and school leaving rate in their settled neighbours, a once noble tradition at odds with modern society, and men within the community in a crisis and how to make sense of it. Enter the man of the hour, the man with the Midas touch, the man who can find commonality with men of any distinction. And reflecting on our own journey to Cardiff and our sleeping arrangements for the weekend, says to our new friend, with the utmost sincerity, "Oh, well, I guess you'd say we're travellers too." A place that holds a special draw for many in our group of friends is the apartment in Portobello. I believe it was referenced in a few other wedding speeches, and both in terms of its location and our age at the time, it had a seminal feeling to it. It was a starting point and ending point of many a night out, and it also served as a backdrop to make names first encounter, which we'll touch on later. So when a room became available to move in at the beginning of 2017, I jumped at the opportunity. And who was to move into the room next door to me at the same time but my old pal Michael Gwynn, who I hadn't seen since he disgraced himself in front of the travelling community. Our days would follow a similar pattern. We would return from work and begin discussing the hot trends of the time, each opinion more ill-informed than the next. This would continue until bedtime, where upon the arrival of the next day, we would awaken with a lark in the morning and spill onto the landing to begin the process once more. This was to the dismay of our other roommates, Phil and Jess, and Chris, who was less enthusiastic about it more in fact. Years later, Phil confided to me that we were terrible roommates. And on reflection, he wasn't incorrect. But these are pressing matters that required addressing with the utmost urgency. And this, for a brief period, ladies and gentlemen, was the high water mark of our young lives, until we were usurped by our respective lady friends. When we weren't ruminating on the many injustices of the world, first thing in the morning, on the landing of the apartment, we would take to the streets and exercise our outdoor voices, where we could be found pacing up and down the length of the canal. And this was in the days before my ashen-haired friend had succumbed to the perils of aging, and women, having got a word of his movement, would flock like gulls after Now at this point, if any of you are having difficulty trying to envision how a young, vibrant, vigorous, vitalic Michael Glynn could have caused such emotion, well, then just try and picture present-day Robbie Glynn. Anyway, these ladies would come from miles around, but Michael was resolute to their advances. until a gal with such guile and grace would swoop in and leave him speechless. And young Michael was smitten, never to fully regain his ability to speak well. A couple of weeks later, I got the official introduction to Amy in our kitchen, which could have been potentially the first time they were cooking together. It didn't take long for me to realise that Amy possesses that rare affability and ease of conversation that I shared with her new husband, which is like a soothing balm to my own awkwardness. And from trips to Inishmore and Paris for the marathon, or just dropping into the house of Drumcondra, it's always a great joy to share in your company as a couple, and I'm certain that these are sentiments that are shared with everyone here in attendance. It was sometime around the latter stages of 2019 when it was brought to my attention that men in their early 30s can't continue enjoying themselves forever. And for reasons that I'm still not quite sure to this day, they have to decide that if living with other men in shared accommodation is the correct way forward. Now, I wouldn't be one to shirk a difficult conversation, but I still have to tell Mick my decision to move out, because if the shoe had been on the other foot, I wouldn't have been able to forgive such treachery. But he was as congratulatory as one would come to expect. The glory days of Portobello were over, but as it soon transpired, there were greener pastures ahead. Whoa. It's getting very dry here.
You're killing it.
What, Harri? What, Harri? Michael was shortly after moving with Amy in the house of into the house on Clonmouth Road in Drumcondra. And anyone who knew the man would have noticed the change that occurred in him from living in that part of town. He began to say things like, "Let's go check out this Gemma Dunleavy gig in the Academy. Up the flats. Or check out my new Shells hat." But mostly it was that great change that can happen to great couples when they begin to share their lives together and take on the best parts of one another. And from witnessing your relationship in its infancy, from the banks of the Grand Canal, to moving in together on the banks of the Royal Canal, and seeing how happy you both are today on these idyllic shores, well, it is undeniably lovely. I'm a firm believer that at the end of the day, when it all boils down to it, all that really matters in this world are the people you choose to spend your life with. And I think you can both count yourself extremely lucky in having chosen one another. And on that bombshell, I would like to ask you all to join me in raising a toast to my dear friends, Michael and Amy.
Cheers, man. Cheers. Cheers.